Arya Sterling had always believed that keeping her bodyguard at arm's length was a matter of professional survival, till she found herself pressed against the glass doors of her penthouse suite at 6 in the morning. Watching Marcus Kane's muscles ripple with each pull-up, and realized that some temptations were designed to destroy even the most carefully constructed boundaries. The silk of her robe felt suddenly inadequate against skin that had awakened with desires she'd spent 3 months trying to ignore. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows separating her bedroom from the suite's private gym, she could see every detail of his morning routine, the way sweat traced paths down his dark skin, how his shoulders moved beneath the thin fabric of his tank top. The controlled power and movements that spoke of discipline earned rather than purchased. Marcus had been her protection for exactly 93 days. 93 mornings of this exquisite torture that began before dawn and continued through. Every moment he stood within her peripheral vision. The morning light caught the definition in his arms as he shifted to stretching, and Arya felt her breath catch when their eyes met in the mirrored wall. For just a moment, neither looked away. The professional distance they'd both fought to maintain cracked like expensive glass under pressure, revealing something raw and hungry that had nothing to do with her celebrity status or his job description. When Marcus held her gaze through the reflection, Arya's robe parted slightly, silk sliding against heated skin as her body responded to the electricity arcing between them. "Ms. Sterling." His voice came through the intercom, that slight rasp making her pulse quicken against her throat. "Ready for the security briefing." She forced herself to step back from the glass, hyper-aware of how the silk had shifted to reveal more than appropriate. 5 minutes, she managed, proud that her voice carried no trace of the heat pooling low in her belly, when Marcus entered her bedroom with the bulletproof vest and morning reports. The confined space transformed their dynamic completely. His hands brushed against her curves as he adjusted the protective gear, professional necessity becoming intimate contact that made rational thought impossible. "Arms up," he instructed quietly, his fingers grazing beneath her breasts as he secured the vest's straps. Arya's sharp intake of breath fogged the mirror beside them, creating their own private moments suspended between propriety and desire. Their eyes met again in the reflection, bodyguard and client, employee and employer, man and woman who'd been circling each other like planets fighting gravitational pull. When Marcus's hands lingered just a heartbeat longer than necessary, Arya understood that whatever was building between them was far more dangerous than any threat he'd been hired to protect her from. The premiere's afterglow shattered the moment. Arya stepped outside the theater, camera flashes exploding like weapons fire as dozens of paparazzi surged forward with predatory hunger that made her previous stalker seem tame by comparison. What should have been a controlled exit became chaos when someone shouted about her rumored relationship with co-star James, turning professional photographers into a feeding frenzy of bodies and lenses that pressed closer with each heartbeat. "Stay behind me," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the mayhem as he positioned himself between Arya and the advancing mob. His hand found the small of her back, guiding her toward the armored SUV that suddenly seemed impossibly far away through the wall of flashing lights and shouted questions. The crowd pressed tighter, cameras thrust over shoulders and between bodies, each photographer fighting for the shot that would pay their rent. When someone stumbled into Arya from behind, Marcus moved with lightning precision, spinning to shield her completely with his body. She found herself pressed against his chest, her face buried in the hollow of his throat while his arms created a protective cage around her trembling form. "I've got you," he whispered against her ear, his breath warm and steady despite the chaos surrounding them. The intimate contact sent electricity through her nervous system, transforming fear into something infinitely more dangerous. She could feel the strength in his arms, smell the clean scent of his cologne mixed with adrenaline-sharpened masculinity. They reached the SUV as photographers pressed against the windows, their cameras creating a strobe effect that made the interior feel like a nightclub. Marcus bundled Arya into the back seat and slammed the door, but the confined space only intensified their proximity. When he gave the driver urgent instructions to move, another wave of photographers rushed the vehicle. "Get down," Marcus ordered, pulling Arya across his lap as cameras flashed against the tinted windows. She found herself straddling him in the leather seat, hyper-aware of every point where their bodies connected. The bulletproof vest couldn't disguise his muscled chest beneath her palms, and when the SUV lurched forward to escape the crowd, she pressed harder against him, an emergency stop to avoid a photographer thrown Arya forward. Their faces inches apart, while both breathed hard from adrenaline and something far more primal. Marcus's hands gripped her waist to steady her, his dark eyes holding hers in the dim interior as the chaos outside faded into background noise. For a suspended moment, neither moved. The professional distance they'd maintained that morning evaporated, completely replaced by raw awareness of bodies pressed together and hearts racing in synchronization. When Marcus's gaze dropped to her lips, Arya felt herself leaning closer before rational thought reasserted itself. The barrier between bodyguard and client had just cracked beyond repair. The last of Arya's guests departed her penthouse at nearly midnight, leaving behind empty champagne flutes and the lingering scent of expensive perfume that couldn't mask the electricity that had been building between her and Marcus throughout the evening's celebration. Her premiere had been a triumph, critics already calling her performance career-defining, but all she could focus on was the way Marcus had watched her move through the crowd in her midnight blue gown. The dress had been chosen for maximum impact, plunging neckline that showcased her décolletage silk that clung to every curve before flowing like liquid around her legs. What she hadn't anticipated was how Marcus's dark eyes would track her movement across the room, or how the champagne would make her bold enough to brush against him whenever she passed his position by the windows. "Successful evening, Marcus," said quietly, his voice carrying the same controlled tension that had marked every interaction since their moment in the SUV. He stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan's glittering skyline creating a backdrop that made him look like he belonged in her world of luxury and carefully orchestrated beauty. "Help me with this," Arya asked, turning to present the intricate clasp of her diamond necklace. The champagne had left her feeling loose and reckless, hyper-aware of how her pulse quickened when Marcus stepped closer. His fingers brushed against a nape as he worked the delicate mechanism, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the cool air conditioning. When the necklace came free, his hands lingered on her shoulders, thumbs tracing the elegant line of her collarbones with reverent precision that made her breath catch audibly. "Arya," he whispered, her name carrying warning and desire in equal measure. In the reflection of the darkened windows, she could see his face, the professional mask finally slipping, to reveal hunger that matched her own. She turned slowly in the circle of his arms, hyper-aware that the movement brought their bodies inches apart. The scent of his cologne mixed with champagne created an intoxicating combination that made rational thought increasingly difficult. "You've been watching me all night," she said softly, her voice carrying the confidence that 3 glasses of Dom Perignon had given her. "I could feel your eyes on me." Marcus's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on her shoulders, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. "It's my job to watch you." "Is it your job to look at me like that?" she challenged, leaning closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Like you want to," the soft chime of his security system interrupted the moment, professional duty reasserting itself as Marcus stepped back with visible effort. But the hunger in his eyes remained unmistakable, and Arya knew that whatever was building between them had just moved beyond the point of simple attraction. The remote cabin felt like the edge of civilization, when Arya emerged from the bathroom, wearing only a towel, steam trailing behind her like expensive perfume, while Marcus pretended to study security monitors that showed nothing but mountain wilderness. The stalkers' escalating threats had forced them into complete isolation. Minimum while his team traced the source. But all she could focus on was how Marcus's jaw tightened when he caught her reflection in the darkened window. "The hot water pressure is incredible up here," she said, moving toward the stone fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across. Rustic furniture that felt more intimate than any five-star hotel. Her bare feet whispered against hardwood floors. As she positioned herself close enough to the fire that orange light played across skin still flushed from the shower's heat. Marcus cleared his throat, his attention fixed determinedly on equipment that hadn't made a sound all evening. "We should hear from the team by morning. Until then, the perimeter is secure." "Marcus," Arya said softly, turning so firelight illuminated. The curve of her shoulder, where the towel had shifted. "Look at me." When he finally met her eyes, the professional mask he'd worn for months crumbled completely. The hunger she'd glimpsed in penthouse reflections was fully visible now, raw and desperate in the intimate lighting that made pretense impossible. She moved closer, hyper-aware of how the towel barely covered her heated skin. "I'm cold," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling with comfortable heat. But when she placed her hand on his thigh, feeling muscle tense beneath her palm, Marcus's sharp intake of breath fogged the space between them. "Arya," he managed, his voice rough, with restraint that was clearly costing him everything. "We can't." She silenced him by straddling his lap, the towel falling away as she claimed. His mouth with desperate hunger that had been building since that first charged glance months ago. Marcus's hands found her waist with possessive certainty, pulling her closer as professional distance evaporated like steam. Their first kiss exploded between them like wildfire, weeks of restraint transforming into primal need that made rational. Thought impossible when Arya's fingers worked the buttons of his shirt with desperate efficiency. Marcus groaned against her throat, his mouth finding sensitive places that made her arch against him with abandon. The bearskin rug before the fireplace became their private world as clothes scattered like expensive confetti. When Arya rode him with abandoned grace, firelight playing across their joined bodies, both understood they'd just crossed into territory where retreat was no longer possible. Later, when Marcus claimed her from behind with controlled power that made her cry out his name, they marked each other completely. Professional boundaries had just burned to ash the talent agency's conference room. Felt like a tribunal when Arya sat facing her publicist Sarah, whose manicured fingers drummed against quarterly projections that reduced her romantic life to profitable statistics. Marcus stood at his usual position by the window, the picture of professional distance that fooled everyone except Arya, who could see the tension in his shoulders from their cabin encounter 3 days ago. "James Morrison is perfect for your brand evolution," Sarah announced, sliding photographs across polished mahogany with the efficiency of someone trading human connections like stock options. "The chemistry tests were off the charts, and his single status makes him ideal for a strategic romance narrative." Arya's phone buzzed against her thigh with a text from Marcus that made her pulse quicken, thinking about the fireplace. "Your skin against mine," she fought to maintain composure while heat pooled low in her belly, hyper-aware of how he watched her reaction through peripheral vision. Later, at her mother's estate dinner, the suffocating atmosphere of calculated expectations made breathing difficult. Patricia Sterling commanded the head of the table with silver-haired authority, while James played his role perfectly Harvard-educated, appropriately charming, completely unaware that Arya's attention was focused on her bodyguard stationed discreetly near the wall. "The Morrison family represents everything we've worked toward," Patricia announced, her voice carrying the particular satisfaction of someone closing a profitable deal. Their pharmaceutical fortune complements your entertainment empire beautifully. The table, Arya slipped off her shoe and trailed her bare foot up Marcus's leg, feeling his sharp intake of breath as muscle tensed beneath expensive fabric. When their eyes met across the room, the professional mask he wore for her family cracked just enough to reveal hunger that made her breath catch. "Excuse me," Arya said, standing with practiced grace. "I need to check the wine selection." The estate's wine cellar provided perfect cover when Marcus followed her down stone steps, his footsteps echoing in the intimate space. The moment they were alone, Arya pressed him against the ancient wall, claiming his mouth with desperate hunger that tasted like rebellion against every expectation her family had constructed. "God, I need you," she whispered against his throat, her hands sliding down to feel his arousal through perfectly pressed pants. Marcus groaned softly, his control slipping as passion overrode professional duty. "Your mother's expecting you back," he managed, though his hands betrayed him by pulling her closer. "Let her wait," Arya breathed. But footsteps on the cellar stairs forced them apart with visible effort, when James appeared in the doorway with wine glasses. His suspicious expression suggested their secret was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. The carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. Marcus's Brooklyn apartment felt like stepping into an alternate universe where authenticity replaced artifice. All exposed brick and honest furniture that had been earned rather than inherited. Arya stood in his modest living room without makeup for the first time in years, hyper-aware that her natural beauty seemed to affect Marcus more powerfully than any red carpet transformation ever had. "It's not much," Marcus said quietly, his vulnerability unexpected from someone who'd commanded her attention so completely. Family photographs lined simple shelves, showing genuine smiles that had nothing to do with social obligations or profitable connections. "It's real," Arya replied, moving toward him with desperate honesty that made his breath catch. "Everything in my world is purchased, arranged, designed to impress. This feels like you actually live here." When he pulled her against his chest, the kiss that followed carried different energy than their desperate encounters in wine cellars and mountain cabins. Here, surrounded by his authentic life, their passion transformed into something deeper reverent. Worship that acknowledged they were crossing from physical attraction into dangerous emotional territory. The shower they shared was intimate beyond anything Arya had experienced, steam creating their private world as they soaped each other's bodies with trembling hands. Marcus traced patterns across her skin like he was memorizing sacred text, while she explored the landscape of scars and strength that told stories of a life lived without privilege or pretense. His bedroom was spartanly furnished but immaculately clean, afternoon light streaming through simple curtains as he undressed her with hands that treated her body like precious artifact. When Arya straddled him on the edge of his modest bed, their eyes locked in intimate connection that made expensive hotel suites seem hollow by comparison. "You're so beautiful, Marcus," whispered, his voice rough with emotion as she moved above him with fluid grace. The threadbare sheets and her diamond earrings created poetry that money couldn't purchase, authentic passion that transcended social boundaries. Morning found them tangled together, Arya's legs wrapped around Marcus's waist as they made love with lazy tenderness that spoke of infinite tomorrows. When he moved inside her with patient worship, she understood that what they'd built was more valuable than any inheritance. Her family could threaten to revoke the kitchen counter provided perfect leverage for one final encounter before reality intruded. Arya's soft cries muffled against Marcus's throat as pleasure crashed through her with revolutionary intensity. "Keisha's coming for breakfast," Marcus mentioned afterward, his sister's impending visit creating the first intrusion of real-world complications. Through his window, Arya could see her driver waiting with the Mercedes that would return her to a world of carefully constructed lies. "What do we tell her?" Arya whispered. Already knowing the answer would force them to define what they'd become. The movie set buzzed with electric tension when tabloid photographers appeared beyond the security perimeter. Telephoto lenses trained on Arya's trailer like weapons designed to destroy rather than capture. Between takes, she found herself pressed against her makeup chair with Marcus behind her. His urgent whispers about evacuation protocols transforming into something infinitely more dangerous when their eyes met in the vanity mirror. "They're watching everything," Marcus breathed against her ear. But his hands betrayed professional concern by gripping her hips with possessive certainty. The confined trailer space made pretense impossible when Arya arched back against him, feeling his arousal through perfectly pressed pants. Both understood they were playing with fire that could consume their carefully constructed secret. "Let them watch," she whispered recklessly, her voice carrying the adrenaline-fueled defiance that made rational thought impossible. Their coupling was fierce and desperate, marking each other with possession that transcended professional boundaries, while photographers circled like predators, sensing weakness. Later, at the exclusive nightclub where industry executives celebrated another profitable quarter, Arya moved through crowd with dangerous confidence born from afternoon passion. When Marcus positioned himself near the dance floor for security purposes, she found herself gravitating toward him with magnetic inevitability that made other dancers irrelevant. The music pounded with primal rhythm that matched her heartbeat as she pressed against Marcus with movements barely appropriate for public consumption. His hands found her hips with professional justification that fooled no one paying attention, while heat built between them despite dozens of witnesses with expensive cameras and profitable secrets. "This is insane," Marcus murmured against her throat, but his body contradicted every word of caution by pulling her closer. When tabloid reporters materialized near the bar with predatory smiles, Arya made a decision that would have horrified her publicist. The bathroom provided perfect cover for desperate kisses that tasted like rebellion and expensive champagne. Against the mirror, Arya could see their reflection, celebrity and bodyguard, employer and employee, woman and man who'd just stopped pretending their connection was anything less than explosive. "We should stop," Marcus managed between kisses that contradicted every word of restraint. Before someone, what?" Arya challenged, her hands sliding down to feel his obvious arousal. "Before someone realizes I'm human enough to want something real." When camera flashes erupted outside the bathroom door, both understood their secret had just moved beyond the point of plausible denial. The hotel room afterward became sanctuary, where adrenaline transformed into passion that bordered on desperation. Both recognizing they might be making love for the last time as their hidden world prepared to explode into public scrutiny. The photographers had found their story. The talent agency's crisis room felt like a war zone when Arya arrived to find photographs spread across mahogany like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. High-resolution images captured every stolen moment: the nightclub grinding, bathroom encounter, Marcus's hands on her body with unmistakable intimacy that reduced their beautiful connection to tabloid scandal designed to destroy rather than understand. "Damage control requires immediate action," Sarah announced with surgical precision, her manicured fingers pointing to headlines that branded Arya as everything from desperate to delusional. "The studio's threatening to pull the franchise deal unless we can spin this as temporary insanity." Studio executives filled the room with testosterone-fueled authority, their faces revealing exactly what they thought of actresses who chose passion over profit. When one suggested Marcus be permanently reassigned to protect their investment, Arya felt something crystallize in her chest that had nothing to do with career preservation. "Meeting's over," she declared, standing with trembling hands that somehow felt steady. The shocked silence that followed gave her enough time to reach Marcus, whose professional mask couldn't hide the rage burning in his dark eyes. The elevator ride to her penthouse was charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the photographers surrounding the building below. When the doors closed, creating temporary sanctuary, Arya claimed Marcus's mouth with desperate hunger that tasted like defiance and infinite possibility. "They want to destroy us," she whispered against his throat, her voice carrying fury that matched his own. Outside, camera flashes created strobe effects against the floor-to-ceiling windows. But instead of hiding, Arya pressed Marcus against the glass with movements that were pure rebellion. "Let them watch," Marcus growled, his dominance fully unleashed as he claimed her mouth with possessive certainty. His protection had always turned her on, but seeing him defend their relationship against impossible odds made desire crash through her with revolutionary intensity. When Arya sank to her knees before him, taking him into her mouth with worshipful precision, Marcus's sharp intake of breath fogged the windows that separated them from a world determined to reduce their connection to scandal. Her intimate service became powerful declaration. She chose him despite every consequence, every threat, every carefully constructed expectation her career had built. Their lovemaking against the windows was fierce and claiming, both understanding. They were marking territory that belonged to them regardless of public opinion. When Arya cried out his name loud enough for cameras to theoretically capture, Marcus's response was to drive deeper, harder, claiming her completely, while the city watched their defiance. "Whatever happens next," Arya gasped as pleasure crashed through her in waves. "I choose you over everything else." But when morning came, the consequences of that choice were waiting with legal documents and ultimatums. The studio boardroom felt like an execution chamber when Arya entered to find her entire world assembled around. Mahogany that reflected faces carved from institutional prejudice and calculated cruelty. Studio head Harrison Webb commanded the head of the table with legal documents spread before him like weapons, while Patricia Sterling sat beside Marcus's father, proud man whose weathered hands spoke of honest labor that had raised a son into something extraordinary. "Your final choice, Ms. Sterling," Webb announced with surgical precision that cut through any illusion of negotiation. "Sign the morality clause amendment and distance yourself from this situation or forfeit your contract, your franchise, and your career permanently." The documents before her represented everything she'd worked toward: millions in guaranteed income, leading roles that opened doors most actors never knew existed. Across from her sat men who'd helped build entertainment empires, their faces revealing exactly what they thought of women who chose passion over profit. "We've arranged for Mr. Kane to receive a substantial settlement," Patricia added with poisonous sweetness that made Arya's stomach clench. "Enough to relocate somewhere far from Hollywood and begin a new life without complications." Later, in the luxury hotel suite that felt like a beautiful prison, desperation transformed their lovemaking into something transcendent and heartbreaking simultaneously. Arya clung to Marcus with desperate hunger, her body memorizing every touch, while tears traced paths down her cheeks that tasted like salt and impending loss. "Promise me something," she whispered as she rode him with agonizing slowness, savoring every sensation while their eyes locked in intimate connection that made words unnecessary. "Promise me you'll remember this exactly as it is." Akasa's hands framed her face with trembling reverence, his thumbs brushing away tears while he moved inside her with patient worship that felt like prayer. "I'll remember everything," he breathed against her lips. "Every moment, every touch, every time you said my name like it meant salvation." Their final coupling was fierce and tender simultaneously, each trying to give the other everything in case tomorrow brought separation that money and legal documents could enforce. When Arya took him into her mouth with worshipful precision, Marcus's whispered promises about finding a way back to each other felt like lifelines in stormy water. Dawn found them tangled in sheets that smelled like satisfaction and infinite loss, both understanding that loving each other completely might mean losing everything else they'd built. "Whatever you choose," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying strength that had sustained him through every challenge, "I'll understand." Arya's answer would reshape both their lives, but first, she had to find the courage to speak words that felt like revolution disguised as surrender. The television studio. Lights felt like spotlights in a courtroom when Arya sat across from talk show host Rebecca Chen, knowing that millions of viewers were about to witness her choose authenticity over artifice in the most public way possible. Her heart hammered against silk as she prepared to speak words that would either liberate or destroy everything she'd built. "Recent photographs suggest you're romantically involved with your bodyguard," Rebecca said with practiced neutrality that couldn't disguise the ratings gold sitting before her. Care to comment on the speculation? Arya felt the weight of expectation from studio executives watching in green rooms, her mother's disapproval radiating through television screens, and Marcus's quiet strength that had sustained her through every impossible moment. When she looked directly into the camera, her voice carried conviction that surprised even herself. "Marcus Kane isn't just my bodyguard," she announced clearly, her words echoing across airwaves that would carry them into homes where people understood the courage required to choose love over security. "He's the man I love, the man who sees me as human rather than commodity, and I refuse to apologize for finding something real in a world built on pretense." The silence that followed felt loaded with transformation as millions of people processed her public declaration. Through the studio monitor, Arya could see social media exploding with reactions that ranged from support to outrage. But all that mattered was the text from Marcus that simply read, "Proud of you." An hour later, she stood outside his apartment door with hands that trembled from adrenaline and liberation, knowing that walking through that threshold meant stepping into a life where authenticity mattered more than approval. When Marcus opened the door, the relief and pride in his dark eyes made every sacrifice worth the cost. Their reunion was explosive and immediate. Arya claimed his mouth with desperate hunger while pressing him against the door, both understanding they'd just crossed into territory where retreat was impossible. The afternoon became celebration of courage rewarded. Marcus worshiping her body with reverent precision while she took control completely. "You chose me," he whispered against her throat as she rode him with triumphant grace. Their lovemaking carrying joy rather than desperation for the first time since their mountain cabin. "You chose us over everything else." The shower afterward became sanctuary where they soaped each other's bodies with grateful hands, steam creating their private world while the outside universe adjusted to their public truth. When Arya took him into her mouth with worshipful gratitude, Marcus's response was to pull her closer, understanding that what they'd built together was stronger than any force trying to separate them. Revolution had never felt so much like coming home. The modest Brooklyn apartment felt like freedom distilled into 800 square feet when Arya discovered that happiness could be measured in shared morning coffee rather than quarterly box office receipts. 6 months after her public declaration, she stood at the kitchen window, watching Marcus work on client security plans below, her body responding to his focused intensity with the same electric awareness that had first awakened her desires. In penthouse luxury, their cramped shower required creative positioning that turned morning routines into intimate choreography. Marcus lifting her against tiled walls while hot water cascaded over bodies that had learned to move together in spaces that demanded innovation. The thin walls meant learning to muffle her cries against his shoulder. Pleasure heightened by the need for discretion that made every encounter feel deliciously forbidden. "Good morning to you too," Keisha teased from the kitchen table where she graded papers for her weekend tutoring program. Marcus's sister having become the family Arya never knew she wanted. Some of us don't need coffee to wake up when walls are paper thin. The independent film set felt worlds away from studio. Politics, where supportive directors valued her talent over tabloid potential. When Marcus visited during lunch breaks, their stolen moments and equipment trailers carried sweetness that million-dollar movie sets had never provided. His security company operated from a converted warehouse space that transformed into playground. After hours, the desk in his office providing perfect leverage when Arya surprised him with visits that had nothing to do with business consultations. Against the window overlooking Brooklyn streets where authentic life happened. Their lovemaking carried triumph that no red carpet premiere had ever matched. Their first real fight happened over finances. Arya's insistence on contributing to expenses clashing with Marcus's protective instincts about providing for the woman he loved. The argument exploded with passion that had been building through months of adjustment. Both learning to navigate partnership between equals rather than celebrity and employee. Make-up sex on their narrow bed was fierce and claiming. Both understanding. They were building something stronger through struggle rather than avoiding conflict. When Marcus moved inside her with controlled power that made their modest mattress creak in rhythm, Arya felt satisfaction that had nothing to do with public approval. "We're really doing this," she whispered afterward, legs wrapped around his waist while city lights played across skin that glowed with honest fulfillment. "Building something real together." "Best decision I ever made," Marcus replied, his hands framing her face with reverent precision. "Choosing you over everything safe but hollow." Through their window, Arya could see the neighborhood they'd made home, where people knew them as Marcus and Arya rather than Bodyguard and celebrity. But when her phone rang with an unknown number, both understood that some consequences of choosing love weren't finished with them yet. The private beach felt like paradise when Arya walked down an aisle bordered by seagrass rather than expensive arrangements, her simple ivory dress flowing behind her as she moved toward Marcus, waiting beneath an arbor his security team had built from driftwood. 50 people who'd become their chosen family watched with genuine joy. Faces reflecting love earned through authenticity rather than obligation. Patricia sat in the front row beside Keisha, her mother's presence representing forgiveness that had taken 2 years to achieve. Patricia's designer clothes looked out of place among the honest celebration, but her tears appeared genuine as she watched her daughter choose happiness over heritage for the second time. "When I first saw you watching my hands during that weapons check," Marcus said during vows he'd written himself, "I knew you were dangerous to everything. I thought I understood about keeping professional distance from complicated women." Arya's laughter mixed with tears as she remembered that first charged moment in her penthouse suite. "When I moved closer to the fireplace," she replied, "I was really moving toward the life I'd always been too afraid to choose until you showed me what authentic connection felt like." Keisha stood as maid of honor, wearing a smile that had welcomed Arya into family more genuine than inherited wealth had ever provided. When the couple kissed, security colleagues from Marcus's thriving business cheered with enthusiasm. More joyful than any red carpet premiere, their wedding night transformed the secluded beach into sanctuary dedicated to celebrating transformation complete. When Marcus carried her across the threshold of their oceanfront suite, Arya surrendered to hunger that had evolved from forbidden attraction into authentic claiming of chosen love. "Mrs. Kane," he whispered against her throat as he undressed her with trembling hands, each piece of clothing removed like unwrapping precious gifts. Their wedding dress pooled around her feet, while his touch mapped familiar territory with new significance. Their lovemaking was fierce and tender simultaneously, marking each other with possession that transcended every boundary they'd crossed to reach this moment. When Arya rode him with abandoned grace while ocean waves provided rhythm, both understood they were celebrating victory over every force that had tried to keep them apart. 6 months later, in the home office of their new house, pregnant Arya straddled Marcus's lap while he reviewed security contracts that had made them financially independent. Her growing belly pressed against his chest as she moved above him with fluid grace, their passion having evolved into something infinitely more powerful than forbidden desire. "Ready for our next adventure?" she asked, her hand covering the life they'd created together with you. Marcus smiled, claiming her mouth with kisses that tasted like forever earned through courage, always.